Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Rice University's Baker Institute and to this special event that we have today. I'm Ed Jeredjian. I'm the founding director of the Institute. Cybersecurity is an increasingly critical concern for U.S. national security, to state the obvious, and one that will likely grow in importance over the next few years. The breadth of the assembled panel for today's discussion says a great deal about the nexus between information security and public policy, which is what we are about. We are particularly pleased to have Congressman McCall with us today. His expertise in these matters is well known. We have two corporate information security officers and a computer science professor here today to discuss this issue. Our country's incredible information resources, computers, networks, smartphones, internet, are vulnerable and represent vectors for attack. This isn't hyperbole. Recent global, national, and local headlines remind us that information technology, with all its great gifts, can be an Achilles heel at the same time. Last summer, the information resources of the Republic of Georgia came under withering cyber attack as Russian forces occupied parts of that country. The previous spring, Estonia came under a cyber attack that interrupted its 21st century data infrastructure for weeks. This summer, we heard of data breaches in our government, including a report that designs for the Pentagon's F-35 Joint Strike Fighter were purloined from an unclassified network. Other reports claim the networks of U.S. government agencies and the contractors who support them have been penetrated as well. In July, here in Houston, the former IT manager of Life Gift Organ Donation Center, an organization that facilitates life-saving organ transfers in our great medical center across the street, was sentenced to 2 years in prison for illegally accessing the center's network and manipulating data after she was dismissed from her position. So it goes on. We cannot solve this problem with policy or technology alone. Policymakers on the local, national, and indeed the global level must step up and take a proactive role in crafting regulations that simultaneously nurture and safeguard information technology. Satellites, computers, mobile phones all have the potential to improve our lives in multiple ways, but only if their operational integrity can be ensured without compromise. Thankfully, cybersecurity has risen on the agenda in Washington, but considerable challenges remain. President Obama, whose presidential campaign network was comprehensively breached last summer, has yet to fill the position of the White House Cybersecurity Coordinator. Just last month, the chief of the Computer Emergency Readiness Team at the Department of Homeland Security resigned only after 14 months on the job. More heartening, however, is news from the Department of Defense that it will be staffing up a joint cyber command. In addition, the Air Force has chosen to headquarter its new cyber component, the 24th Air Force, here in Texas at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio. These are good moves, but the Pentagon cannot single-handedly protect our cyber borders. And as you know, it has many other missions. That requires partnership, a grand coalition of local and global entities, combining the efforts of the military, industry, academia, law enforcement, diplomacy, and information technology. This is where the Baker Institute comes in. Over the next year, we will work toward building such a cybersecurity coalition here in Houston, hosting speakers and opening our facility for discussions and workshops on a cybersecurity issue. Why? Houston is an incredible hub of commerce and industry. It is the center of the global energy business, home to the world's largest medical center, and the second busiest port in the United States. IT plays a crucial role in our city's successes, optimizing upstream and downstream operations, monitoring patients in the medical center, and keeping just-in-time supply chains running. When systems are hacked, those activities and many others are potentially jeopardized. We may see unfettered access to the internet and its associated technologies as a right, yet we also need to think of the responsibilities we must accept to enjoy that right. In that spirit, we encourage all of you to participate in whatever degree you are able to do in the cybersecurity program here. Our door is open. Our Fellow for Technology, Society, and Public Policy, Dr. Chris Bronk, is up for a busy year. Now it's my personal pleasure to pass the podium to my colleague, Sally Ann Keller, Dean of the George R. Brown School of Engineering, who will introduce our speakers. Her leadership experience spans the academy, industry, and government. Sally, who was named a Fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science in 2005, received the American Statistical Association Founder Award in 2002. She was also named a National Associate of the National Academy of Sciences in that same year. She is a Fellow and past President of the American Statistical Association. Her presence underscores a commitment in both the Baker Institute and the Brown School and across the university, including our Office of the Vice Provost for Information Technology, the Rice Computer Security Lab, and the Ken Kennedy Institute for Information Technology to make information security a priority. Sally?
It's my privilege to introduce our speaker today, and I'd also like to say it's great to see so many students here today, and I'm going to encourage you during Q&A to be sure to ask your questions and be heard. So today we have Congressman Michael McCaul with us. He actually doesn't need a lot of introduction for the folks around here, but I'm going to do it anyway. He's a fourth-generation Texan. He holds a bachelor's degree in business and history from Trinity University and a law degree from St. Mary's University. In addition, he's a graduate of the Senior Executive Fellows Program at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. As a congressman, he's incredibly busy and is currently a member of the Homeland Security Committee, where he serves as the ranking member of the Intelligence Subcommittee. In these committee roles, he's charged with assessing classified intelligence as it relates to terrorism and the risk of terrorist attacks. He also has oversight on how information is shared in this domain. Really, really critically important problem. McCaul is a member of the Subcommittee of Emerging Threats, Cybersecurity, Science, and Technology. He's on the Subcommittee on Border, Maritime, and Global Counterterrorism and the Subcommittee on Emergency Communications Preparedness and Response. He serves on the Committee of Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Science and Technology. So you can see he's playing a tremendous role for us in Washington and beyond. Prior to being elected to Congress, he served as the Chief of Counterterrorism and National Security in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Texas. And he led the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which was charged with detecting, deterring, and preventing terrorist activity. He has served as the Deputy Attorney General for the state of Texas under the now Senator John Cornyn. And he has also served as a federal prosecutor in the Department of Justice's Public Integrity Section in Washington, D.C. So you can see that he has had a huge career and interest in foreign policy and security and now in terrorism. So with that, I welcome your comments.
Thank you so much, Dean and Ambassador. I thought you framed the issue very well. Let me say first, it's great to be able to talk about an issue other than healthcare for the next 30 minutes. And this is not a town hall, so this has a special place in my heart, the Baker Institute. I recall I was telling the ambassador, who I had the privilege to work with, I was on an airplane, and it was my, I think it was my first term in the Congress, and all of a sudden I'm sitting down, and who sits next to me but Secretary James Baker, this legendary icon. And I said, wow. I said, so we had 3 hours on the airplane to talk about things. And I said, what are you going to Washington for? And he said, well, I'm getting ready to start this thing called the Iraq Study Group. And I said, well, that's really interesting. He said, yeah, you should come along to the first meeting, and just hang out. And as it turned out, we had that report that came out through CSIS. The ambassador played a pivotal, crucial role in that report that I think was a real service to the nation and Congress, as we many of us in the Congress paid close attention to the report and tried to get those policies passed. And I think to some extent, a lot of those recommendations were adopted in the final analysis, and that was a great thing for the country in the situation. But cybersecurity is one of those issues that people tend to sort of glaze over when you mention it, and yet I consider it to be one of the most probably important national security issues that we face. We have a lot of hot spots, whether it be, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan. But I thought Admiral Mullen, the chair of the Joint Chiefs, framed it really well when he said, he was asked, what do you see as the greatest threat to the United States? And he could have said Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan. His response was cybersecurity, cyber warfare, because he knows the offensive capability that the military is capable of doing. And that capability in the wrong hands could be very destructive. I sort of compare it to the invention of the nuclear bomb. This great technology that we had that was so destructive. Cyber can be very friendly, and we can do great things with the internet, yet it makes us very vulnerable. And the idea of this sort of warfare capability in the wrong hands, like say a nation state like Iran, could be very, very damaging. And I'm going to talk about some of the past attacks, and I also sort of compare it to 9/11. And we had many warning signs along the way up to 9/11. And people, again, I don't think that people are taking this issue serious enough. Before 9/11, we were attacked. Our embassies were attacked in Africa. We had the Marines in Beirut. We had the World Trade Center. 1993, we had the USS Cole. And it really wasn't until 9/11 that people even really understood the idea that there are terrorists out there. That most Americans woke up to the fact that there are terrorists out there who want to do us harm. And I hope I'm wrong, but it may take a similar attack on the United States before people wake up to the fact that this is a very serious issue. We had hearings on this when I was ranking on the Cybersecurity Subcommittee on Homeland. There was a classified program at the time that was declassified. We found a vulnerability as the Aurora project through Idaho National Labs. They found a vulnerability that through the click of a mouse they could blow up a power grid. And it finally was declassified. It was on CNN. It was something that we discovered on our own, which is a good news. And we have since, I think, found a solution to that. But it was a bit of an eye-opener. And when we had these hearings, we as most of you know, everything is tied to the networks. All the critical infrastructures are tied, whether it be our power grids, our financial institutions, the FAA, everything is tied. And therefore, since it's open, that portal is open to the internet, it's also vulnerable to an attack by the internet. In the hearings, we focused a lot on what had already happened. And what we found was that the federal government had had massive intrusions and massive amounts of data had been stolen, primarily coming from Asia. The Pentagon had been hacked into, the White House had been hacked into, the Congress had been hacked into. The number one office hacked into is the Export Control Office within the Department of Commerce, who decides on dual-use technology and whether that can be sold to other countries for obvious reasons. The intention behind that. But when we found that and I call it espionage, phishing for information, really espionage, equal to the size of the Library of Congress. That's how much data had been stolen. And it still goes on today. And now imagine if agents of a foreign power went into the Pentagon and stole some file cabinets of documents and then got caught outside the Pentagon trying to steal those documents. Imagine the furor that the American people would have if they saw that kind of espionage taking place, very tangible. People understand that. What they don't understand or don't seem to take as serious is the idea that that's happening in the virtual world. In the virtual world, they are going into our files, and they are taking those files and they are stealing them. This caused us grave concern, and we had hearings on the issue. We had people from Department of Homeland Security, Internet experts, cybersecurity experts, NSA, DOD, and what we found was that there was really no coordination going on between these critical agencies. And when we asked, who's in charge, what we found was that the fingers were getting pointed at each other. And NSA and the DoD, maybe rightly so, looked at DHS as a new stepchild that they didn't think had the wherewithal to do it. And DHS, being the agency tasked with defending the nation, NSA and DoD had the offensive capability to go into a country and shut it down, was not coordinating. So the people that were the experts that know how to offensively go in and do this were not coordinating with the agency that was tasked to defend the nation. So then I got this call from General Cartwright, who is probably the best cyber expert in the military today. And it was kind of one of those, I'm not embellishing, it was one of those kind of weird Washington experiences. General Cartwright wants to meet with you. And I said, okay, yeah, that would be fantastic. He just testified before Foreign Affairs in his uniform. And where does he want to meet? He wants to meet you at the Dubliner, in Washington. And so I showed up. He's in plain clothes, had ordered a beer, and we had an Irish dinner together. And he said, I just want to let you know that you're onto something with this. I've been worried about this for a long time. And he is one of the renowned experts in the military. What we did from there was to form, going back to CSIS, our good friends that did the Iraq Study Group, such a great product. We went to CSIS. And so Jim Langevin from Rhode Island, Democrat, who was chairman, I was ranking member, in a bipartisan, nonpartisan way, this is not a partisan issue, decided, we're going to form a commission. It's the Commission for Cybersecurity to make recommendations to the next president of the United States, whoever that is. And this was well before the election. And we had some of the top experts really in the world on cybersecurity from all the relevant agencies, from the private sector. Scott Charney from Microsoft, who had headed up the DOJ computer crime unit. General Radigi was one of the co-chairs. Jim Lewis from CSIS. And then me and Congressman Langevin. We came out with, I thought, some pretty good recommendations. And it got a lot of attention more in the inside sort of internet society circles, cybersecurity circles. I thought the reception was fairly good. But I think the top recommendation that we had was that nobody's coordinating these relevant agencies and making them work together so that the offensive capability is coordinated with the defensive. So we decided one of the best ideas would be to elevate this to the White House. So you had an Office of Cybersecurity within the White House, and you had a cybersecurity coordinator that served on the NSC, the National Security Council, to coordinate these efforts. I was pleased to see, I think last May, very quickly, that President Obama took those recommendations and had a press conference and unveiled basically a cyberspace policy review and mentioned the idea of a White House coordinator that would report both to the NSC and to the National Economic Council. But as the ambassador mentioned, and that was great, that was very quickly taking a step in the right direction. Since that time, Melissa Hathaway, who was in charge of all this, has left the office. The position has not been filled. And I think most importantly is the title of this position. They're basically you have an assistant, a deputy, and a special assistant. This position was made a special assistant to the president. The reason why they're having a hard time filling this is because people like Scott Charney, a lot of the other experts in the field, are not going to leave everything they have, move to Washington, or take another job to be a special assistant. It's not powerful enough. It's third in line in the ranking. That a special assistant will have no authority when they go to NSA and say, you know what, and believe me, you're dealing with some pretty dark world there. They're not going to listen to a special assistant. Possibly an assistant or a deputy. This position, and again, I was very heartened to see they took our recommendations, but in my view, it hasn't been made powerful enough. This has to be a powerful position. It has to be taken seriously to effectively do what the commission, what the intent was behind our report. I'm hopeful that the administration will take another look at this, and I'm hopeful that they can move forward and fill a higher level position to accomplish this critical mission. Since that time, we saw last 4th of July, well, let me back up. April 1st, Configure was a cyber attack, a very sophisticated one, and fortunately it didn't pan out. July 4th, there was a cyber attack. There was a denial of service attack. The ambassador talked about the denial of service attack in Estonia. Russia essentially was shutting down the country of Estonia. A denial of service attack which cuts off everything. That's how powerful this really is. This is the Korean attack. And it was relatively unsophisticated, but the thing I took away from it that was, I think, the most disturbing thing about it was the intent behind the attack. The intent was not what China or Asia usually does, and that's fishing for information or trying to steal data, or like they went into NASA and hacked into NASA and stole all sorts of data out of NASA from a technology standpoint, trying to steal things. But rather the intent behind this was to do harm. The intent behind this attack was to damage, to cripple, and to bring us to our knees. That's the thing that's disturbing about the Korean attack. And many of you may know how this works, but it's very interesting that you have the what's called the bots herder and the botnets. And the botnets, there are 50,000 of them. The bots herder can turn the botnets, and let me just point to, if you can see the writing. This is the bots herder here. These are the botnets. This was presented in a initially classified, now unclassified briefing that we got after the attack. And the bots herder turns the botnets into, essentially, for lack of a better term, robots. Basically controls the computers. And then from there, the botnets can send out these messages, which they did send to U.S. websites and to South Korean websites. And it temporarily brought many things down. This was not to steal information. It wasn't criminal enterprise, which we see a lot of in the business sector. This was to shut things down. And why did they do this? I think they're testing us. This was one of the first steps. They wanted to see how we responded to it. They want to see what our capability is in terms of how well can we defend from this kind of attack, and then how's the United States responding to this attack when it happens. I think if there's a good news story, DHS, NSA, DOD, everything went into very quick action. The denial of service attack didn't really have a lot of permanent damage. But again, it's the intent behind the attack that is most disturbing to me. A lot of people before 9/11 said to Congress, to members of the intelligence community, to the FBI, what did you do to stop? Why couldn't you have stopped this? And what did you do to stop this? This is where I think we find ourselves today. This is where I, as a member of Congress, receiving these high-level briefings, find myself that I hope that one day I'm not having to answer that question. Congressman, what did you do? You knew about this capability, but you didn't try to stop it. Or what did you do? What did you do what did the NSA do? What did the intelligence community do? And that's really where we find ourselves. There's been some legislation recently introduced in the Senate, Rockefeller-Snow bill, that essentially I think one of the pieces, it's a fairly good bill, but one of the pieces that I think has gotten most attention is the idea that the president can shut down private networks like that if he needs to. That raises a lot of issues about the government coming in, shutting down private computers and private networks. You can imagine the government intrusion crowd, the black helicopter crowds going nuts over this idea. I think we got to be very, very careful about what would trigger that kind of response And I think the bill needs to lay out more clearly when that would be triggered. In my view, it would have to be triggered if it was an act of warfare. Just as we grounded airplanes after 9/11 to protect the American people, I think the triggering event here is this an act of warfare? That was one of the questions I presented to the commission. I think you need to define what is an act of warfare in the cyber world. Because the fact is they can attack anonymously. It's very, like in this case, we still don't know where the bots herder came from. We're still trying to track back where the initial attack emanated out of. We think it's North Korea, but we can't prove that. And even if we could, then the question is, was that act an act on behalf of a nation state? Or was it just some rogue person trying to do mischief? That's where the intelligence, I think, comes in. You can track it down to the computer eventually, but then you need to know who was behind the computer and what was the intention. We know the intent was to do harm, but was this an act on behalf of a nation state or not? These are very, I think, difficult questions. This is not, we talked about World War II and landing the flag and being at Iwo Jima and signing the peace agreement. All rules are off here. This is a completely new paradigm. And when you talk to any of the generals, whether it be Admiral Mullen or General Cartwright or Petraeus, who I consider to be one of the smartest, along with Cartwright, they'll tell you the future of warfare is going to be cyber. It's going to be cyber warfare. And when we see something like this, we know that they are testing us. Since then, the DoD has set up a National Cyber Command, which has both an offense and defense piece to it. That's to protect the .mil, which is basically the military computers. The DHS has set up the National Cyber Response Plan, which is a plan to protect the .govs, which is basically the government computers. And the NSA has stepped up with a cyber command. These are all very, very important pieces. But I really can't emphasize enough how I want this administration, after giving them this report, just like we did President Bush, the Iraq Study Group report, which he, I think, should have accepted 100%. But I think this president needs to elevate the issue, fill this position to a higher level, and really take this serious. Because the commanders in the field are telling him that this really is a serious issue. So when people glaze over, when you talk about cybersecurity, this is the other part of the story that they're probably not hearing about. The private sector, and this is in closing, is probably the private sector controls most of these critical infrastructures. They're tied to the networks. They are the critical infrastructures out there, the financial, the energy sector, the technology sector. And traditionally, there were what were called ISACs, Information Sharing Analysis Centers. When I was heading up the Joint Terrorism Task Force, we would meet with them and try to get them to share information through these ISACs, they call it. The problem historically has been that no company that's has to report to stockholders wants to give threat and vulnerability information. We've got to ensure that, number one, we're coordinating with the private sector on this, and particularly the leading companies in the private sector in each of these critical infrastructures, that information sharing is taking place and that we are giving them the assurance that we're protecting that information. And there are several vehicles to do that, but we've got to gain the trust of the private sector, and we have to put legal mechanisms in place to ensure that information will not get out publicly, whether it's through the FOIA or any other route. Once we do that, I think we have a pretty good plan. If we elevate to the White House, we've now got the DoD, DHS, NSA working together more. They have their plans in place, and then the private sector piece has to come together. It's too important not to take seriously. I commend you for, first of all, showing up and listening, but also for taking it seriously, because I know you do. And I, again, consider this one of the most important issues that we face in terms of national security. So with that, I want to thank you for inviting me, and it's been a real honor to be here. Thank you.
So let's open it up for questions.
Congressman, I was riding into work this morning, Dr. Leeds, and I heard on NPR radio they announced this conference. And one of the people, and I think it was from Rice, said, this is not a terrorist threat, this is not a problem, this is for business problems. And I think that really underestimates what you're saying. I'm not sure why that was said on NPR radio this morning introducing this conference.
I don't know why they didn't ask me to be on it. I'm sorry, I couldn't go on NPR this morning, Mike. You know, there's my press guy right here. Why wasn't I talking about this? Yeah, and look, there is the one aspect I didn't talk a lot about is the criminal conspiracies, the Russian business network. That there are professional hackers that do this for a living to make money. And they'll bribe companies. You know what? I got this data, or I got this intellectual property that I just stole. I mean, this is a huge economic drain to our business and our country when they're stealing our intellectual property. And the main offender, and I don't mean to point fingers, but China is stealing our intellectual property. When they hack into NASA, of all things, which has some of the highest level technology secrets in the country, and they steal that's a real problem. And I think the criminal conspiracy or element, if you will, is very much alive and well. The one concern is a terrorist hiring someone like the Russian business network, to take that capability. They don't have to necessarily have it themselves. They can hire a sophisticated hacker that knows how to do the botnets and go in and do that same thing. We know that there are countries that don't have our best interest at heart who are developing this cyber offensive capability. And it's like the nuclear bomb. The genie's out of the bottle. It's a matter of time. And the scary thing, it can be done so anonymously you don't even know where it's coming from. And so I listen to NPR. I'd probably disagree with them on that point. And I think you understand it. Yes, sir.
Excuse me. You mentioned that the intent for one of your main focuses with all of this was the person behind it, or the intent behind the attacks. Does potentially getting caught up on who the bot spreader may have been, or where it's coming from, or what their overall intent is, detract from the overall more important issue of better protecting our country, government, infrastructure, information, and citizens?
Well, sure. I don't think they're. I think that goes hand in hand. I don't differentiate the two. I think obviously protecting our networks, going to more secure networks in terms of the military, the government. Private sector is never going to be completely taken offline, just not practical. But knowing the source helps us identify the threat so we know how better to protect ourselves. And we can also, in terms of threat assessment, which is what we do all the time, it gives us a better idea of, okay, what countries are pretty far along with this. If that was coming from North Korea, for instance, that would be interesting to know because obviously North Korea has a pretty strong alliance with Iran. And if North Korea has that capability, then possibly Iran may have that capability.
Follow-up question real quick. But it's a distributed attack, so they could be computers coming from anywhere.
Yeah.
And policy-wise, I understand that it's important to know the direction of the attack's coming from. But if we're looking to first and foremost protect our digital infrastructure, should we be more worried about protecting ourselves first and then figuring out where it's coming from after that? Or
in reality, we're doing both. And that's a great question. We're really doing both. We're trying to protect and then also investigate, the source. We do know the botnets were in South Korea. Yeah. So and I don't think that's classified. But they. Maybe is there any press here? I'm not sure I want to get quoted on that. But no, I think that's unclassified information. But we do know that the 50,000 were out of South Korea. So, and they're attacking, the U.S. and Korea. So, the speculation is it probably could have. A lot of the intelligence community thinks it probably came out of North Korea, but they haven't proven it yet because we can't trace the And they will. I think eventually we have that capability to trace it back to the original source. That's very good intelligence information to know, though, in terms of, well, what countries have what kind of capability and what we need to, how we can better protect ourselves from that. Because, again, the alliance is there. North Korea, Iran. Of course, Iran is tied to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. It's an issue.
What possible goal of any other country could be accomplished by an act of cyber war on the United States?
I think this attack was a test.
Well, let's forget that. See, when I hear you talk, I feel like the boogeyman's going to get us. I mean, we've got to kind of refine this so we don't go to war for some frivolous reason again.
No. No one's advocating that.
I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, you're not advocating.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a chaotic impressions left.
Mm-hmm.
That, I mean, should we cut back on use of the internet because we could get attacked by some these unseen cyber forces?
I think.
See, I don't see what another country is going to accomplish by an act of cyber war. I see vandalism. I see business reasons. I see carelessness on the part of our own government officials. I see all that, but I don't see how there's a real danger of cyber war on us.
That's an excellent question. I'm not trying to be the boogeyman here, but
Hugo Chavez, as much as he may hate us, is not going to start a war with us. I mean, we'd like nothing better. We could get their oil. I mean,
this is the Korean, for instance. It was a test to see what their capability.
Well, but what's?
Well, let me answer if I can answer the
North
question.
Korea
If I
is
can
not
answer,
going to start something with us.
well, they're building nuclear weapons too, but
If I were Japan, I'd be scared.
if I could answer the question, that'd be great.
Please ask a question. And then
My question, well, I did ask a
and let the speaker
question. What goal of
respond to the
cyber
question.
war could be accomplished by any other country attacking us?
That's legitimate.
Well, okay. This was a test to see what their capability is. It is a capability that we need to be concerned about. It's a capability that Russia perpetrated on Estonia and put a denial of service attack on Estonia. It's a capability that our own military can go in and shut things down. Imagine the city of New York being the denial of service attack, shutting the city of New York down, for instance.
How long could that last?
It could last for a very long time. And imagine the economic, I hate to say this, but there are other countries and other people that don't like us.
I understand.
And that's just, I'm trying not to be too naive about it. There are people who want to do us harm. If they get this capability, that we know the goals, of the terrorists, they are out in the world. The goal is to cause economic damage. They want to cause economic damage to our country, as they did on 9/11. That's why I think this is an important piece that we need to be, and that's why I think the top generals and admirals are paying close attention to this, because they know what the capability is, because they have it. They know what it can do.
Are we weak for military?
Let's let somebody else ask a question here.
Okay. Yeah.
What is your, if you have a detailed game plan, because the proposition that we're for cybersecurity, everybody's for cybersecurity. And now we could go so far as to say, let's suspend the Bill of Rights and we could have a much more secure country. So to say you're for it really doesn't tell you.
Well, I'd recommend you look at the report that we issued. And I don't have time to go through the entire report. It's the Cybersecurity Commission recommendations to the 44th President. We do take in privacy issues, liberty issues. I raised the issue about the idea of the President having, in this current bill, in the Senate, the idea that the President would have the authority to shut everything down. Now that's an issue that you're referring to that I'm concerned with as well, with the President of the United States having that kind of authority. So I don't know if that makes sense. Let's see. Yes, ma'am.
You made a very important statement, I think, when you said people start talking about cybersecurity, another half glazes over. And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that most people really don't understand what you're talking about. And you start talking cyber, they don't have a technical background, so that you don't get past here. And with that being said, and this meeting being tied back to public policy, is there any plans or policy for the education of the masses? I really think that that's probably main key to get out there and to get focused, because we talk about the zombies and the botnets. Most people don't have any concept that their own personal computer may be acting as a zombie at night, something like that. And there's no education, very few programs out there to teach the mass public what.
Yeah, and that was one thing we were attempting to do with CSIS in the report, was to raise awareness. And we did get, some, people did take notice of it. And that's why we want this administration to raise the awareness, of it as well. And, in the schools they teach, you got to be careful on the internet. I've got 5 little kids, and there are a lot of bad actors on the internet that you want to protect them from. It's kind of a similar issue here, and that's what we were attempting to do. Obviously, as this gentleman indicated here, he's not aware of the threat and what the capability really is. And that's an education piece. And perhaps we can sit down and talk more about it. Part of it is you can't talk about a lot of it, too. I can't go in depth about what the NSA can do or what the DOD can do. But I can tell you, we have gone in, and we did, in Iraq and Afghanistan, and there were certain things done. And we have capability. That's why we take it so seriously. We know what can be done with this. And when a country like Russia does a denial of service attack on Estonia, that's something that should get attention. And I think this latest Korean episode.
I think that my real question, though, is back to you as one of our politicians, is there are there any plans, funding possibly in place, to go back to the educational institutions to help support getting the word out and making people aware of what the possibilities are, and how to help keep them from becoming targets? Or, once again, a lot of this is going to be teaching people how to harden their own perimeters personally before we even get to the national infrastructure, because they will take the individuals and use those resources, since the internet is open, back against.
Well, that's why one of the recommendations, and I think the education piece is a great idea. That's one reason we wanted to elevate this to a national office of cybersecurity that would get that sort of profile, would raise the awareness within the White House, because only the White House can tell these relevant agencies what to do. But it's got to be a position that has some gravitas to it that can get that work done. And I think that's why we were attempting to raise awareness by doing that. And I think the education piece is a great idea. It's a great idea.
Well, I'm mindful of your time.
Let's take one. I'll take you, sir. Yeah.
My concern is kind of the opposite of this gentleman. And that is that you tended to take the same line as the press. The configure was basically a non-event. By most accepted ways of recognizing that there are over 5 million computers that are still infected by computer. Mm-hmm. That's a botnet 100 times the size of the North Korean. So I'm curious as to whether this is an attempt at denial or an honest lack of awareness.
No, as I mentioned, configure was as you know, much more serious or more sophisticated attack than this Korean was. It just comparatively didn't do the same amount of damage. Although you're right, and we don't know where configure came out of, and of course configure, and you're obviously very well educated on the issue, had a much higher level of sophistication that really could have done some harm.
Still could. And
it still could, because it's still out there. We don't know who's behind it, So, yes, sir.
So, with cyber being omnipresent and everywhere, is the current thinking mostly about warfare from outside the borders, or is it also from inside the borders? Or is it any thought being given to that? Because
they can come from anywhere.
Because the most studies after studies show that the most devastation can be done from inside those that already have the keys to the kingdom.
Well, unlike, say, a physical attack by, say, Al-Qaeda, for instance, who really kind of needs to get inside our border to do this, there are no borders when it comes to cyber, and they can perpetrate something halfway around the world. And I think that's the other piece to this that you raised an excellent point. I mean, it could happen anywhere. Now, do I see cyber warfare and attack, in terms of grading it. I think the criminal attacks, stealing IP, bribing businesses, that's much more prevalent and is happening. I think the espionage, stealing information, hacking into NASA, taking technology secrets, that's all that's happened, and that's very real. When I talk about cyber warfare, I'm not trying to spook anybody. I'm just saying that we have that capability, and we need to be prepared looking forward, because I do see that as a potential threat down the road. And I think we need to prepare for it now, before it happens. Yes.
Following up somewhat on the education question, and I used to work for a Fortune 200 financial services firm, and they got it. I mean, they realized, wait a minute, if we have to pay money out, the CEO got it real quick. The CFO got it. Security needed stuff. The bank, you don't take money out of banks. They don't like to give money out. Wait, that's another story. So they got it. Upper management got it. I don't think upper management in the government gets it. I just finished a conference with some people from DOE who love this new smart grid idea, and I'm like, well, what about the security aspects? And they're like, no one will hack it. There's nothing worthy hacking. And I said, I love you guys, because that means I don't have to pay for electricity anymore. If you leave a system that blatantly open, that blatantly ignorant of, but I mean, this, somewhere at the top, we still don't get it.
Yeah.
And my challenge to you as a member of Congress, why not do what my CEO did, which is power the purse? If you're an executive and you're not getting something, you didn't have you didn't have a job, but you also didn't have budgets. I mean, a lot of very senior control that way, and I'm not seeing that in our federal sector at all.
Well, these hearings that we had, if you have any interest going back and watching, if you have a hard time sleeping at night, you can watch some of these here. But that's what, it's exactly what you're talking about. It was very revealing, insightful, and a little bit disturbing to see, the lack of coordination. No one knew who was in charge. DHS was still a relatively new agency that really didn't have its act together on this. And that's what we were attempting to do, is get the attention through public hearings that this is an issue, this is a problem, and we're going to form this commission through CSIS and try to do something about it. Having said that, the commission is reconstituting in Jim Lewis at CSIS, and we're going to continue to make further recommendations to the White House on this issue.
But like FSMA, if I flunk FSMA, or I get a D- in FSMA, so what?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no, if I go drive off campus without a seatbelt, woe be unto me should I pass a law enforcement officer, because he's going to penalize me.
Sure.
But if I was CIO for Department of Interior, DHS, any of these, FSMA is not really a concern, because as long as I file my reports to the Inspector General and say I'm doing something.
Well, we really called them to the mat, at these hearings, which was the purpose of doing it. And that's why I think this position, the White House needs to have some teeth behind it, because that person can go and say, you're not doing your job, and then they can report to us, and we can hold a hearing and take appropriate action. And maybe, say, we don't trust you to handle this anymore. Maybe we need to put that authority in another agency. But that's kind of a work in progress right now.
Well, I'm following that because I spent a lot of time with DHS working groups. Your Congress, your argument about should DHS or NSA have it, did have it.
Somebody else.
No.
Yeah, there are a lot of speakers and a lot more questions.
Yeah. Congressman, you made the point about the lack of understanding and getting through that barrier, and we've not only...
I'm sorry, I kind of like holding town hall, so I'm kind of used to doing this. I get the tough questions.
I mean, we've seen it.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a home run.
We've seen it previously. How do we get it to that level? You made the point about having an analyst dealing with the different organizations. We've seen Melissa Hathaway go. We've seen Ahmed go before him. Many of us in this room are friends with Howard Schmidt. We've seen it there. That the senior level is not understanding this. We've seen it with members of Congress. Representative Putnam in Florida was the biggest InfoSec advocate for years. Mm-hmm. We get to a certain point, we get many recommendations that and we try to pass them at the senior level, but they don't get adopted.
And I'll end on this note because that's a great point. The departure of Melissa Hathaway was very troubling to me. because I know her, and she's probably one of the smartest experts on this issue. And she really wanted to get something done. And not getting into all the details, her departure signaled, in my view, a lack of seriousness, on the part of the administration on this issue. And I hope I'm wrong about that. I hope that this position is filled with a top expert, and that person's given the proper authority. But her departure, I think, sent some sort of shockwaves out there to people like yourself who are educated on this issue. And that wasn't a positive development. And I think I'm one of 435. Our job is to try to really get the attention of the administration that you really got to take this thing seriously. Just as General Cartwright told me at the Dubliner, just as Admiral Mullen mentioned, this is one of the top threats as he sees it.
Proactive versus reactive.
Precisely. And I agree with that comment. Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate your time. Thanks.
I would like to ask our three panelists to come and take their places.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you.
So for the rest of our meeting, what I'm going to do is to first introduce our three panelists, and they will each be asked to make about 15 minutes worth of statements, no more. Because what we would like to do then is to be able to open the floor once again to Q&A to all of the panelists. So I'm going to start with Professor Wallach, Dan Wallach, on the end, who is an associate professor in the Department of Computer Science here at Rice University. He earned his bachelor's degree at the University of California, Berkeley, and a doctorate at Princeton. He is the co-director, or actually the associate director of a very important National Science Foundation center that's called ACCURATE, which stands for a Center for Correct, Usable, Reliable, Auditable, and Transparent Elections. His research involves computer security and issues of building secure and robust software systems for the Internet. He has testified about voting security issues before government bodies in the United States, in Mexico, and with the European Union. And he was part of California's top-to-bottom review team for its voting systems. He has also served as an expert witness on a number of voting technology lawsuits. He actually began his security career in 1995, where he and his colleagues found serious flaws in the security of Java applets that could allow the attacker to use the web browser to hijack a computer. So we heard a little bit about that just a few minutes ago. Along with colleagues at the Johns Hopkins University, he is co-author of a groundbreaking study that reported significant flaws in the Diebold's AccuVote's TS electronic voting system. And he is currently part of the Defense Science Study Group. So that's Dan. So we'll move on now to Ann Rogers, who holds a bachelor's degree in physics from the University of Texas at El Paso and a master's of business administration from the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. She is currently Director of Information Safeguards at Waste Management and Vice President of Waste Management Security Services. She oversees the company's information security policies, guidelines, and security awareness program. She established and directs the company's computer forensics program for internal investigation and e-discovery support. As a founding member of the board of the Corporate E-Discovery Forum and a contributing author of the American Bar Association's Information Security for Lawyers and Law Firms. Rogers has served on international board for the Information System Security Association and is the past president of the Houston chapter. Prior to working at Waste Management, Rogers was a principal consultant with PM Tech Pro LLC, a program manager with IBM Consultant for MITRE Corp, and the director of information systems for the Warren King Companies. So very interesting background to bring to this discussion. And our third panelist is Edward Amoroso. Could you put a C in there? That would just help me. I'm sure there's somebody out there in the cyber world that can help me with that one.
Italian anymore if you did that.
That's true. That's true. I like the Italian. So he holds a master's degree and a doctorate in computer science from the Stevens Institute of Technology and is a graduate of the senior executive program at Columbia Business School. He actually, for the last 20 years, has been an adjunct professor with the Stevens School, and his work has been featured in the Wall Street Journal, CNBC, Network World, and the New York Times. Currently, he is the Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer for AT&T Services, Inc. He oversees a whole host of things, including real-time security protection of AT&T's network and computer infrastructure, including mobility services. He oversees security policy planning and architecture for AT&T's enterprise. He oversees security support for AT&T's IT, IPTV, and entertainment initiatives. And he leads the design and development and operation support for AT&T's managed and network-based security services. His 24-year career actually started at AT&T when it was then Bell Laboratories, where he worked on securing the Unix operating system as well as numerous federal government security initiatives. More recently, he has championed AT&T's network-based security strategy, which centers around emerging in-the-cloud protection services such as network-based firewalls and DDoS defense. So I think you can tell among our three panelists, we've brought you a spectrum of individuals who have had a career that's focused on various issues related to security. And now we will start with each one of them giving some statements. And why don't we start with Ann?
Thank you very much. I feel dwarfed between these two fellows. I've taken the time to read through the Cybersecurity Initiative and the proposed bill, and I sit here with some trepidation as a representative who has to secure an enterprise, because what I see happening again is it's the infrastructure, it's the funding for the government entity, and yet 2, 3, 4 years down is what they're projecting, and the problems are now. And our industries and our people that are trying to actually secure our enterprises and work on this information highway where everybody shares everything, see that we're losing ground. Part of what we're doing now is trying to hit with the compliance end. Now, those of us who have a lot of gray hair and happen to secure on the mainframes and worked in the government and some of the high security systems, remember the time when we had some semblance of capability to control that. And we put a lot of hardened security in place. It's much more difficult today because what's happening is the technologies and the sharing enterprise and the feature and function that's out there outstrips what we can do for any kind of security. There's also a pressure to compete in that area. And so those of us who have a security mind and say we want to be careful to protect our intellectual property, our users, the information that we hold for ourselves, our third parties, our customers, we're up against the wall of people say, but I have to be on Facebook and I have to be on Twitter and we have to be able to share and we have to open the gates and connect to all of our partners, whether or not we know if they're secure. And don't stop me. It's the business. So I understand the cybersecurity issues that come from a government view and the outside threat. And I think sometimes we do it to ourselves. And as I watch what's happening in our environments and in the security realm where people are trying to figure out how to protect the really valuable things and how to keep people from stepping on each other or stepping on themselves in the security realm, we're up against a pretty heavy challenge. I will say that education is one thing. Trying to tell people they should be careful, that they have to tread carefully in the internet, that isn't going to happen. There are not enough people that can train the general populace to secure their computer. It's an impossible task. And I don't think we really want to do that. People want to be able to use the computing functions. They want to be able to use the features and functions of applications that we put out so that they can get a job done. I work for a company, Waste Management. People know us as the trash company. We do a heck of a lot more than that. I mean, we're an energy company, we're a recycling company, we're innovative. But the main thing that I look at is all these other features and all these other enterprise functions that they want to put on the network and want to share and propose for business are focused on the business. They are not focused on the security. That's our problem. Now, we share that problem with the people that build the software and build the hardware and build the tools that we'll use to try to implement this. I will say that for too long, we've had people building really shoddy software and shoddy hardware. We've backed off of the place where we could actually control our systems and our software and our networks to the point where we're totally in defense mode. And you have no way to assure that what you're putting in place or what you're implementing based on some vendor's assurance is really going to protect your information that's sitting behind there. And so we take the defensive stance of vulnerability scanning and putting up firewalls and putting in all kinds of extra checks. We'll stay on the defense until we change the paradigm that says what we're trying to protect is the data and the information that's floating around. And if you take a look at how to harden your networks or how to harden your software or your hardware, you have to think about how you ensure integrity of what you put in place. And so if you put software in place and install it, you know what the features and function and what the signature of that software should be. If somebody alters that or perverts it, you should be able to detect it immediately. The same thing with data. And so I think sometimes what we've done is putting more bureaucracy or more rules and regulations around it. Sounds good, but I'm afraid it's too far down the road. We have to take a different look at the paradigm. And I speak as someone who has to live with that and implement it. I'm sure you feel the same way. What do we do next? I don't have an unlimited budget. We're doing business. And so what we spend or what we put into implementation and securing our environment and our data and our information has to balance with what we have to offer and what we have in profit margins in the business. And so as a consumer of security products or a consumer of network services, I have to try to rely on what I have for protections in those environments. That's a very difficult thing to do these days. Not every company should have to redesign and reinvent and protect and build that security. So what we need is a more concerted effort that says when you bring something to the table as a software package or as a network configuration or a piece of hardware, it comes packaged to protect itself and to protect what it transfers. That has to be built in. And until we win that battle, cybersecurity is going to be a real warfare.
Thank you very much. So my name is Dan Wallach. I teach here at Rice. I will hopefully see many of you in classes that I teach at some point or another. I thought long and hard about what points I wanted to make today. What would be the right message to give to the audience? So the thing that I think is the number one thing to understand is where do these botnets come from? Well, they come from somebody exploiting a security hole. So what that means is somewhere in your laptop or your desktop or your smartphone, there's a bug in the software, and somebody figures out how to exploit that bug, and then they can take over your laptop or your desktop or your cell phone. And then somebody collects them, that's called a botnet, and then fun happens. Now I've got 50,000 zombies to do my bidding. It sounds like a great horror movie thing, but this actually really happens. Well, how can we solve these things? How can we prevent them? How can we detect them? How can we make sure they don't happen again? This is partly a technical problem and partly a policy problem. The technical problem means that the vendors who write the software inside the devices that we use have to take security seriously. Microsoft, to their credit, really does take security seriously. At least they do these days. They didn't used to. Microsoft, 10 years ago, was getting beaten up left and right for how bad their platform was. And it was a security mess. And finally, nobody less than Bill Gates stood up and said, no more. Microsoft, we're going to stop developing for like 2 months. We're not going to write a single line of code, and all of our developers are going to security boot camp. That was a radical thing. And from talking to people I knew inside Microsoft, there was a sea change in the attitude of developers. Whenever there was an argument, Should we fix something from a security perspective, or should we somehow preserve backward compatibility to make sure everything keeps working? Whenever that was a debate, whenever that was a tension, backward compatibility always won. After Bill Gates said, we're going to take this seriously, now fixing the security bug, even if it causes pain elsewhere, that began to win. So that was a top-down policy, cultural change deep inside Microsoft. And now, 7 years later, it actually really has had a tangible effect. Microsoft products don't suck as bad as they used to. And I see the IT guys are all chuckling up in the corner, right? So now the problem is we need to, so part of the problem is we need to get the vendors on board. Microsoft, Google, Apple, these guys know what they're doing, mostly. They're not what I'm worried about. What I'm worried about are all the other vendors, the vendors who normally fly below the radar or don't have the amount of public scrutiny that a Microsoft or a Google has. I've invested a lot of my time chasing after the vendors who build the electronic voting machines. Our democracy does kind of depend on them. And it turns out that they really deeply don't know what they're doing. It's a real problem. And even though we have all these studies that you're welcome to read that detail minutely exactly how they don't know what they're doing, and even though I've been publishing papers on how to build better voting machines and we're trying to reduce the risk to market for them to go with more sophisticated technologies, the finances, the market structure, the market's not demanding it. They don't have the demand, so they're not going to invest the engineering effort, and the problem doesn't get fixed. So now it goes from a technical problem, how do I build a better voting machine, to a marketing and policy problem. How do I either incentivize or compel them to build devices that don't have these problems? This could possibly be addressed at the government level. The government could come down and say, if you want to sell a product that does voting, then you should meet some standards. The problem is, guess who writes the standards? Anyone want to guess? It's a problem. There's a technical term for it called regulatory capture. It happens in a lot of industries. And now voting is the industry I know the most about, but should we believe that every other little industry gets it right? I'll drop a hint and then I'll pass it on to some of my colleagues here. Rice, in one of their new undergraduate colleges, well, new as of a couple years ago, put in door locks. And these door locks, you swipe your magnetic card and it opens the door. Seems like a pretty straightforward technology, right? Every hotel's got these things. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out that they had a brand new idea where these door locks could talk wirelessly to a base station, which could then collect data from all the doors, who's coming and going when. That's great. We've got more security data. Well, turns out that the protocol that they're speaking is unencrypted, unauthenticated, unanythinged. So if you jack into the base station, you see student ID numbers flying back and forth. And that makes it really easy for you to either pretend to be somebody else and pretend like you swiped into a door, and pretend that you're somewhere else when you're really, like put yourself somewhere other than where you just committed a crime, and then imitate the person who belongs in the room. You can do all sorts of mischief. Well, that was almost a year ago that we discovered this, and I'm still going back and forth with the vendor trying to convince them they have a problem. The vendor still doesn't believe they have a problem. I'm not naming the names, but there aren't that many companies who build these things. So the voting industry, the door lock industry, who's left? So I think part of the real challenge for us is partly technological, partly policy. Is giving President Obama the power to shut down computer networks going to solve this problem? I don't think so. I think the solution is going to come from better regulation, better standards, and better scrutiny. And I think that's where we need to go.
Thank you, Dan.
Great. And my business cards say computer security, but I think waste management is like the best description of what I actually do for a living. I'm going to go back and change all my cards.
Great.
You could have like a redundant business card, right? Director, waste management, waste management. First off, thanks for inviting me. I think you guys are lucky to have Dan here. I hope you all take his class. I think it's important, particularly if you're studying engineering or computer science. Let's do a little history. Computer security arguably started in the mid-'70s. There were these researchers, David Bell, Len LaPadula, two good friends of mine, working. And the original conception of computer security was pretty ambitious. It was to stop all types of malicious activity, at the time primarily in government. It's kind of ironic, right? And it was okay to be ambitious in the beginning. All new sciences are overly ambitious, right? The original purpose of chemistry was to let people live forever, and then that whole alchemy piece got pulled out. The original purpose of math included a whole bunch of numerology garbage, and you can think of any scientific discipline, right? Astronomy has astrology. They all have their kind of silliness. And I think computer security, at its original inception, was maybe a little overly optimistic. And what we have now, almost 40 years later, is chaos. And I think that, it is, I thought a really good point was made up earlier about, gosh, are we supposed to worry about the boogeyman? Obviously not. But let's think as engineers here for a minute. Is there an engineering discipline taught in this university where it's considered perfectly acceptable for the end product to be knowingly broken? And that as part of the life cycle management, you distribute it widely, and you expect end users to find these problems, report them back, and then these things called patches get put in place. My wife drives a Volvo, and when she thinks there's like a little noise, she brings it back to the dealer, and they all have to be quiet, and they put like stethoscopes on the car to hear the noise that she's complaining about. They take it very seriously. Think of like the version of that at Best Buy if you brought your computer back and complained it was blue, it's blue screening. They'd fall on the ground laughing, and then they tell you that's what computers do. Ha ha ha. Like I think that we should be utterly ashamed of ourselves as computer scientists that we're in this state now. To make us feel a little bit better, when we think about other engineering disciplines, they've had a little head start on us, right? Like the civil engineering department can kind of like go back to the Greeks or something. They were building stuff. So computer science as a discipline hasn't had a lot of time. And I think what's happening is we're starting to gradually build a discipline that makes sense. I think we've already come to the conclusion. I'm sure what I'm about to say will offend someone, but like artificial intelligence is almost the alchemy of computer science. Like it's the early 1950s movies and like Twilight Zone episodes had computers as people. Remember that? It like freaked everybody out. That's all gone. Computer security needs its piece of that. So let's talk a little bit about the problems we have now. I thought the congressman did a good job. I testified in front of the Senate Commerce Committee recently, expecting to go in and hear a bunch of brain dead stuff, and it was pretty good. And you got to admit, even if you didn't agree with every word the congressman said, you guys just witnessed a congressman putting a diagram of a botnet up, so he was calling the bots botnets. You can forgive that. And, so the Russian attack on Estonia was actually two high school kids. We can forgive a detail here or there. The guy put a diagram of a botnet up, and I think that's pretty darn good. So let's go through a couple of the problems here. Number one, Dan hit on the number one issue, and that's software. So software engineering has got to grow up soon, and it needs to start in academia. Period. That is a given. Good software engineering is good security. I'm in charge of 1,000 people at AT&T who do computer security, and we've come to the conclusion that really what we need to do is good software, good system, good network, and that means good security. Like, how those of you who have who work in industry probably remember in the 90s, we did all these kooky quality things. Remember those things where you had a quality consultant come in, so you did this thing and then a quality blanket gets thrown on top of it? Guess what? We live in a decade where it's perfectly acceptable to build a thing and then throw like a security blanket on it, right? Design this thing and then bring the Dan and the security team in and do this thing onto what you built. Wrong. Doesn't work for software, doesn't work for systems, doesn't work for networks. So just forget it. That isn't going to work. And that's all. So as the progression of computer security grows, we factor out the nonsense and we keep the reality. And the reality is you can't throw a thing onto something and make it secure. So that's one. Number two is we're never going to teach people to do good system administration, so we better just get over it. My mother will not ever properly system administer a computer. So you want to know what we should really do? And hold on to your seat here. We should take the computer away from her. She doesn't need it. Anybody under 30 knows that all the software they use lives in the cloud, and they don't need a computer. Like I bought my kids Macs, and I got them like shrink-wrap Microsoft Office, little box, thinking they need it for school. It's still shrink-wrap. Like they get it, they run this little, Citrix clients or whatever it is, some client they're running, and they get it all in the cloud. So they're on Facebook and Twitter, and it all lives off in Never Never Land, and they don't need a computer. My mother needs to get to marthastewart.com, send email, and open a Word attachment. She does not need a Dell tower that's like attacking China all day long. So that's the second thing. We need to rethink our computing infrastructure fundamentally. And then I think the third thing, and this is maybe a bumpier issue, is that we need to repair and rebuild the relationship between citizens, businesses, and their service providers. Like right now, when you say service provider to a lot of citizens, you might as well say used car salesman, because it's just not a relationship that has been nurtured properly the last few years. In the 98 to 2001 time frame, it became very fashionable for companies to get into broadband, get into backbone provision. Like a company called Williams Gas had these empty pipelines, and this guy thought this up should get like the Nobel Prize for business. They took a bunch of fiber and an air gun. They put a little birdie on the fiber, and the guy goes, shoots it through the gas lines, and they're a backbone carrier immediately. They have no lab, no network management, nothing. And then they must have read Doug Comer's book, and they think, well, routers, piece of cake, man. Put source, dest, plug the router in, scatter them around, put fiber in, you're done. That's it. No problem. And what happens? You push all the work out to the edge, and now every man, woman, and child, in fact, Marcus Raynham said this, one of the guys I'm sure Dan knows. He said, and I memorized this, he said, the tragedy of modern computing is that we've turned every man, woman, and child into a Windows system administrator, and the corollary is Windows security administrator. So we've scattered and distributed security responsibility around the world, and the bottom line is, whether you like it or not, the service providers are in an awesome place to stop a lot of this crap. I watch it, I say waste management. If you're getting attacked, you're a business, and I don't have a service level agreement with you, you know what we do in our ops center? We go like this. Boy, look at that one. There's a doozy. I bet they're having a bad day. Do nothing about it, because the SLA says push the packets, don't drop them, don't look at them, get the heck out of the way. And that's what we do. We watch the attacks, and we see these perimeters getting exploded. So I think that those are things we've got to do. They're not easy, but I think the software one is the most urgent, and I think that begins in academia. I'll turn it back to you.
So I'd like to go ahead and open the floor for questions, and I'd appreciate it if you would introduce yourself as you ask a question.
Make another point. I'm a physician, and we are being pushed to doing EMRs, electronic medical records. Yet we've got HIPAA on the side telling us, don't tell anybody your patient's name or that you saw him at 2 o'clock yesterday. Do you know what they're doing to protect this against HIPAA information? As the insurance companies are requiring electronic medical records in offices, hospitals? I'm sorry, I'm Dr. Lee. Excuse me.
So I think that there's no easy answer, because in medical informatics, your data should be absolutely private to you right up until the minute you walk into an emergency room with blood spurting out of your arm, at which point you don't want to have any privacy. You want them to know exactly what's going on with you. So this loophole in your privacy really complicates medical informatics. And a lot of really smart people are looking at it and are banging their heads against trying to satisfy all these privacy policies, yet trying to make things become paperless and more efficient. For example, I had a CAT scan on my head to do with my sinuses, and my allergist said, I need to send you to an ENT to go have a look at this. And what does he do? He burns a CD and has me hand carry my CT scans from the allergist to the ENT so the ENT can look at the inside of my head that the allergist has already scanned. There's like a total of 40 megabytes of data on here. Photoshop turns out to load it just fine. I can stare at my own head. There's nothing inside. They could have emailed it, but it was too complicated for stupid HIPAA reasons to email a 40 megabyte file, so instead I have to hand carry a CD. We could try to pull it all into the cloud. I think that's going to happen because doctors don't want to be Windows systems administrators either. You just want to have your very expensive GE scanner, and you want to have a plug that goes out there somewhere and then not worry about it anymore. I think it's going to happen. Getting it to happen is going to require, again, people to figure out all these hard corners. So somebody needs to work out all the corner cases. Well, what happens when somebody needs to go from the allergist to the ENT? And somebody needs to figure this all out. And that's going to take a while. There's no silver bullet.
See, one more thing, follow-up. Do you think they're pushing electronic records too hard before they're ready for it? The insurance companies are going to insist on it within another year or two. The government's insisting on it, but they don't have the protection that you're talking about.
You're getting the feature function required now before we figured out how to keep it safe. That's exactly what's happening.
On an interesting related note.
Need to introduce yourself?
Oh yes, Davers. Please meet everyone. Dave with Concurrent. There are interesting notes originally found on Gizmodo, but it goes back to CNET in late April of this year that says the headline: Configure infected critical hospital equipment, expert says. I know it's on the internet, so you can't always believe what you read, but apparently several hundred computers or machines in critical equipment in an undisclosed number of were affected. So that ties into that.
It doesn't. I'd just like to make a comment about that. In the rush to get a lot of things interconnected so we can get access to it and so that we can keep track of it and we can make sure it's up and running, we've connected a lot of systems that in no way ever thought they would be networked. And the people that actually built them never looked at the security or even the potential of having them networked. And so what you have now is many of those medical machines have operating systems that were vetted and very well tested so they could be certified and FDA approved and all that. And if you change one bit in there, all bets are off. They're not certified anymore. And so there is no built-in security, and there's nothing there that makes them hardened enough to sit on a standard IP network. It's something that we have as a challenge with any kind of SCADA systems, with any kind of control systems that used to be disconnected, but now are looking at how they're going to ride the IP backbone. And so there are challenges here. I wouldn't be surprised that they've been infected.
So is the potential solution?
Let's go to another question.
Ariel Schnitzer. I'm a student here, and I was wondering, is any of the cyber warfare real time? Obviously, if waste management was getting attacked and you felt data was getting taken, the initial reaction would be just to unplug. But if you were at AT&T and they were a customer of yours, is there any kind of cyber warfare retaliation that you can help defend against that in real time, or is it just finding?
Yeah, I can explain how we do that. Let's say waste management's getting whacked pretty good with the.
And we can't unplug.
Yeah, it's not good to unplug. Unplug equals bad. So here's what we do. When we see that there's a customer concerned with denial of service, and it's amazing how many are not, the first thing we have to do is we have to establish a baseline, I'm going to say a bad word now, profile of their behavioral traffic. Now, I'm not talking about looking at their packets. I'm talking about doing standard network management along the lines that we've been doing for the last 110 years. So you establish a baseline. Once you see some meaningful change from that baseline, you look very carefully at what's going on. If you think there's a problem, let's say her IP address is 125.1.2.3. We use the border gateway protocol to trick our routers to think that 125.1.2.3 is actually a whole scrubbing complex, a big shock absorber that we put in the network. We push the traffic through these big scrubbers, big car wash in the network, and then we tunnel the traffic to her front. This is a clumsy approach. It's like, think of it as a bunch of people with plumbing valves and moving things around. It's really primitive, But it works, and we throw a lot of people at it. And where we used to do this once on every blue moon, now we do it all day long for multiple customers all the time. So I think the question was asked earlier, what could happen with botnets? Well, it's not what could happen, it's what is happening. Like sometimes I'm up all night chasing one of these things with a big customer. If it really has impact, like for example, we saw some big ones aimed at the domain name system, which could have some pretty fundamental impact on business. So I personally get involved. I remember being all bleary-eyed and then taking the train down to the Pentagon for a meeting, and the topic of the meeting was, should we do some exercises to get some experience with cybersecurity events? And I'm going, like, oh my gosh, like, dude, you're so not getting this. So that's how service providers do it now. It's clumsy, but it kind of works, and we can just brute force a solution. Got to come up with something better than that, but that's how we do it now for a customer.
And the big customers that can afford to watch their networks end up knowing what their traffic is. They catch the things that are bad in their networks. So if you just did network profiling, and I've got a totally infected network, all bets are off. I mean, what I look like normally is bad. And so you really need to figure out what you're screening, and it's a tough thing to do. I used to help work on that kind of stuff.
Isn't the weakest part of the network the small customer, the tens of thousands of small regional banks who are supporting lots and lots and lots of small businesses, and their Cisco router's password still says Cisco? You can't profile them, but that's where most people in America actually work.
So I think that you have a valid point that the largest, your Bank of America, your Chase Bank, probably hopefully know what they're doing. Whereas as you get down to the corner office, the local bank that has some local IT guy, they might not have as much of a clue. And then when you get down to your home network connection, I'm certain that probably a third of the people in this room, their machines must be infected at home. I made up that number, but it's probably not too far off. That's the sort of thing that we can't. So part of what we can do is try to suck that out. There's a huge outsourcing movement nowadays where small companies don't want to be in the business of running their network. And actually, there's precedence for this. It used to be that companies didn't want to run their own phone system either. They didn't want a PBX. And AT&T did a bang-up business of, we'll just wire up all your local phones and it'll feel like a PBX, but it's actually in our closet, not in yours, and we'll run it for you. And of course, charge you every month. And I think exactly that's going to happen. Why should small business run its own Microsoft Exchange server when they can just pay somebody to do it for them? Whether it's Microsoft Exchange or everything else, all you really need on your desk is basically a web browser in a box. And I think that's where we're going.
And the only thing I'll say in addition to that is when you start running the cloud, make sure you know who you're going for in the cloud. Because part of the issue here is you can jump from the frying pan into the fire if you get a cloud provider who's the cheapest and isn't securing it at all.
I'm Scott Cutler, another professor at computer science and electrical engineering. I think we're missing a part here. We can fix the Microsoft or try to do it, hopefully get to do better at that, or have grandma not touch her computer or whatever. But we're also putting on a large number of game machines. Game machines are now being connected inside the network. They're inside the firewall of most homes. They're operating with children to who we will not be able to put on the safeguards that we wish to do. Is it going to be possible to go off and address it from a better software side, or do we have to have it be an endpoint from the infrastructure between the house to a house to keep the network itself safe from a lot of these promulgated?
I can answer. In our lab, we have Wheeze and other stuff running bot software and attacking. The reason it's not a big issue is because it's so much easier to go after a PC. So it's almost like if we were able to fix the PC problem, then people would be going after gaming. Like the reason you don't see these mobility bots is why bother? It's like the pickings are so nice and ripe over in PC land, then why bother? So that's the only reason. I mean, gaming consoles or computers, right?
I think that's a matter of time rather than that.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So, game machines worry me, but at least with the game machines, again, people are hopefully paying attention. I'm more worried about, my new refrigerator and my new washing machine have Ethernet jacks on the back. I don't have them connected to anything, but what happens if I plug my refrigerator into my network? Do I have to worry about somebody attacking my fridge? Will it attack my food? There's a different denial of service attack. So these are, eventually, all these different gizmos and devices are going to be, the computer inside my washing machine is probably faster than the thing I wrote my PhD thesis on. That's sort of a sad statement about the state of washing machines or my PhD thesis, but I think that really every computer that's plugged into the network, whether it's a smartphone or whether it's a game machine or whether it's a washing machine, is potentially a target. And again, it comes down to problem number one, software. We need to know how to write software that sucks less.
Yeah, can I just make a comment? When Dan said he was going to hook up his refrigerator, everybody in the room laughed. And that's because you have a personal connection to that. You think, that's way too dangerous, I would never do that. But when Ann mentioned SCADA systems, nobody laughed. Why didn't you guys laugh at that one? Like, who gives a darn about Dan's refrigerator? Dan's my friend, but I don't really care if his refrigerator gets whacked. Go buy a new one. But if somebody knocks out the SCADA system in a nuclear power plant, and I don't mean just knock out, but I mean these SCADA protocols are not supported in firewalls. So you know what you have to do to let the SCADA protocol work through a firewall? Open everything up, right? And when you go in and look at these things, you can't believe it. So if the refrigerator being connected is like a little teeny weeny ant, the SCADA and the control systems in electromechanical critical infrastructure supporting essential services, that's like the size of the moon compared to this one. That's what the congressman was saying. And look, you guys are pretty smart, pretty feisty group. It's pretty easy to pick at some of the details that the congressman's working and saying, but we really need to help him and help them. Like, we need you all to help steer the discussion in the right direction. It's way better that we've got congressmen putting pictures up of bots than what you had in like 1980 or 1990 when you'd go talk to a congressman and they would say something utterly ridiculous, that had nothing to do with anything. This is pretty good. So I hope you guys will do everything you can to be of assistance to a lot of these folks in Washington who are trying. Thanks.
Mike Bias, as an R&D engineer for Cisco for 10 years and now currently working as the architect for the National Cybersecurity Center. And I guess the question, I started the intern program at Cisco, and what a lot of times what I had to do is completely reprogram the students as they were coming out of the university to make them more centric to the commercial world. But in addition, everybody wanting to come out now doesn't know structured programming. It's all object oriented, and they don't even know what's in their code, right? So and then in the commercial world, there's such a huge pressure to get the software out so fast that entire blocks are shipped halfway. A number of projects I ran at Cisco, our entire blocks of my code were shipped halfway around the world, and I got them back in 3 months. There's no way I could have tested that software in my products before I had to take them to market.
Yeah, I have to make a comment. It is possible to make network equipment that works perfectly with unbelievable reliability. You know how you do it? You take the business equation out. AT&T built Unix systems into our TDM environment that were designed in 1972, and they're still running, and we haven't touched a line of code, and it's the most stripped-down Unix system you've ever seen in your life. At divestiture and then at trivestiture, when we spun off Lucent, suddenly the equipment manufacturers had to make money at equipment. And you don't make money by writing code into a device that sits for 30 years untouched. So it's part of the problem that we've got an infrastructure that absolutely demands that things be changed every 12 to 18 months. And it causes some problems. So what we need to do is improve that engineering cycle. It's not going to change So we have to improve that, and I think Cisco's done a good job. I think it's one of the few companies that, along with Microsoft, I really do think gets it. But there's a lot that don't, as I'm sure you're aware. And I think that we need to recognize that this equipment, these changes in these equipment, software is a big problem in our infrastructure.
Hi, my name is Gary Leibowitz from Exabox Technologies. I spend most of my day out looking for doing forensics on data that leaked into the cyberspace. I have a question specifically from a business perspective. And I recently read an article, and where you were interviewed by Steve Hunt, talking about how you can take that evil, the security from a business perspective that gets in the way of doing business, or that evil necessity, and turn it into being something that's more positive, that actually contributes to the business. Maybe you can give us some more insights how you can actually use security in a positive way as opposed to just that necessity.
Right. That's one of the things that it kind of taxes your creativity at times to look at what they're trying to do in the business and figure out how you can enable things with security instead of telling them no all the time. And one of the things that we've done is we've integrated some of our DVR systems that are normal security camera systems in with our point of sale system. So we have a lot of trucks that run over scales, 20, 30, 150 times a day in all the landfills and transfer stations, and we're charging by weight and time and type of load and so forth. Part of what happens is, in order to be able to make sure that things are doing the right thing with the load and the type of load they have, people would have to do camera audits, cameras that look down inside of the waste. And so part of the problem you'd have is you'd truck an auditor out there and you'd pay him to sit for hours at a time, run through the VCR tapes on these cameras. Well, we put DVRs out there, and we integrated them with the point of sale system. So now when the truck gets on the scale, you get all the information of the transaction with the truck and the ticket number and the type of waste and what the rates were and the whole thing, and it actually superimposes on our DVR. And it becomes searchable text in the actual images. So now if I have to do a camera audit and figure out how many of these types of trucks or that kind of waste went across that scale, I can actually pull up the camera by doing the search for all the transactions. I don't have to sit through all the hours of the other dead space. Pull that up, take a look at it, do audits on it, and be able to report. And a lot of this is environmental reporting and compliance reporting and so forth. So this was a great boon. There are some other things that happen when you start doing this kind of integration. You find new and creative ways to do that. And so a lot of what we've done is we've pulled some of our security monitoring and our security functions in to help with our safety programs. We now have our control center that watches all of our alarms and all of our other things, also watching what's going on with our safety of our personnel. And so you just start integrating these kinds of functions in with the normal part of your business, and you take a lot of cost out. That's a plus for security. You have to hunt for those kind of opportunities, and they're not there all the time. There are times when we have to say, no, you can't go run off and put this new application in and just free for all go for it. But if you can find those kind of like the opportunities to be partnered with your business and to show a cost-benefit relationship with them, they tend to listen to you the next time you say no, and it makes it a little easier. Part of what I'm hearing here is kind of a frustration across the board. All of us who have the charge to make sure that things don't get lost or broken or stolen and that we don't damage anybody else while we're sitting on that network. We're outnumbered by the people that want to do new and greater things. And I will appeal to the students sitting in here, because one of the things I preach when I teach my classes is you can code all day and you can do these new whiz-bang features, but if you haven't baked some security and good secure coding and good error checking into your code, you're not doing anybody a favor. And so one of the things that I would ask the universities to do is really focus on, good integrity checking on code, doing good discipline checking for the security measures that you want to put in when you develop software.
David Skin, I'm a student. What are the odds and how long do you think it'll take before the U.S. government recruits some of us students for some sort of cyber army? Cyber army.
We might need to call Congress. 400 would be working at.
Because China already has about 1 million people.
So, let's see. It's a little bit of a tricky question to answer, but it's certainly the case that the military is, broadly speaking, staffing up for the cyber command type activities. And this happens across the branches of the military. So to the extent that you will be recruited, has a lot to do with, are you planning to join the military at all? Rice is not a big ROTC kind of school. So first off, if you show up in the military, with ROTC and a computer science degree, guess where you're going to end up? But of course the military can't do it themselves, and of course that's where they reach into companies, they reach for consultants, and a lot of other people get sucked in, brought down from companies like AT&T to help teach them, and the teaching goes in both directions. So will there be a cyber army? Well, part of the magic of cyber warfare is that it doesn't require a whole lot of people, just a small number of really sharp people. And once they build tools, then anybody can pull the trigger on those tools.
Dan, did you see, I think it was Russia, put a call out to the citizens asking them to offer their computers up for bot installation, meaning that all their citizens become combatants, I think, right? If you do that, don't you become a combatant? Isn't that a bizarre concept, like to say, yes, government, take some of my CPU and broadband connection. I'll give you about 500 kilobits per second or so. I don't take any more than that. And go ahead. You want to go attack somebody? You can. That's amazing.
It's just a different twist, though, because if you stop and think, how many people volunteer to put their computer up for grabs for the SETI research? You get people to do things for different motivations. And the problem is a lot of times you don't know what you're offering to do. And that's kind of a problem for all of us.
I think we have one more question.
Umesh Brahma with Blue Lens. I heard a common theme about fix the software coming out of everybody. And the question that I really have is, so if we're going to fix the software, and I know that Waste Management creates a lot of software themselves, and AT&T is probably one of the biggest IT product software houses where you're creating a lot of software yourself for your own consumption as well as for external use. Can you maybe give us some of that front edge thinking as to what are the processes to really start putting in software development houses as well as other places? Do you start with design at the very design function in your own organizations? Do you have outside labs? Do you certify? I mean, how does that whole process work within your own organizations?
I can answer. You'd be surprised that a lot of the concepts that you would think to be somewhat mushy are taken very seriously in software development shops. Like, we think there's a spectrum in engineering where you got a mushy word at each end. At one end you have the word elegant, at the other end you have the word complexity. And the problem is the pendulum has swung way too far to the right in terms of complexity. So the idea is to somehow bring things back to an elegant design. Again, AT&T, that's where we design Unix, right? So anybody who grew up writing software tools in C or C++ and Unix gets some feel for our development style. But that development style has gone way too far to the right. Everything's gotten too complicated. I think Ann said, we're networking things we didn't expect we're going to be networking, and that happens way too often. You connect this to that, to this, to that, to that, and before you know it, you don't even know what's going on. You've got this explosion of complexity. There's a great computer scientist who died a few years ago, Edgar Dijkstra. I think he's basically the greatest computer scientist who ever lived. And he was, by the way, the first blogger, right? Anybody used to read the EWD faxes that would go? Wasn't that a blog? I mean, that's so cool that he was blogging in 1970. But everything he said has come true. He said, if you don't treat software engineering as an unusually formal branch of applied mathematics, that you're getting it wrong. So we're trying things with cheap labor. There's a medical practitioner up in the back. In 1850, if I had gangrene on my arm, couple of guys would hold me down like at the dentist's office. They'd give me a shot of whiskey and whack, they'd knock it off, cauterize. I'd probably live, but I wouldn't like it. It's way better now. So software engineering has to go from what we have now to something totally different in the future where it should be a right and a privilege to develop code to run essential services. What's more important to all of us than the essential services we all agree on, like 911? We all have senior citizens in our family who might fall or have a heart attack, need help. The ability to make a phone call and get somebody there to help save your life is like, it's not a human right, but it's pretty darn close. And there's software that sits at the heart of that. That's an honor, a privilege, and something that should be the height of your career after years of training. When you go to get a heart surgery done and the surgeon comes over, you want to see gray hair, and I did 1 million of these, and I know what you don't want like, I always wanted to do one of these. You get that in software all the time. Gee, I always wanted to write a device driver for a SCADA system, and who's going to stop you? You just do it. That's the problem. So companies like AT&T, you would think, big service provider, they probably don't even think about this. Man, do we ever. And we have ever since the days of Unix. It's always been sort of part of our culture to try and focus on these mushy things like elegance and simplicity and small size and pulling things out. That's what we do.
And I'll just add that sometimes it kind of depends on what you're doing with. I mean, if you're whipping out a little thing that isn't going to be doing anything important, you may not spend a lot of bucks working on it very hard. You wouldn't want to sell it to a lot of people. That'd be a problem. But for anything that's going to be in the core of your business, you're darn right. You're going to end up looking at it. You're going to error check it. You're going to test it. You're going to do code reviews on it. You're going to run vulnerability scans on it, because when you put it out there, it's dollars from your pocket. The problem you have now is that there are people that aren't as conscientious that can sell a product. Hey, it does this really whiz-bang thing, put it in a box, sell it to somebody like your mother or your grandmother who doesn't know, right? That looks great. Runs fine. Don't know what it's doing under the covers. So I think we do have a real responsibility to say you got to back off of that. Not everybody can be a whiz-bang programmer throwing software out there and endangering everyone else around them. Not everybody runs out and builds cars. Not everybody runs out and puts together safety gear. It's got to be qualified. It's got to be checked. UL certified someplace. So we need something like that.
And I think that the trick, can I follow up? The trick to making this happen is, of course, it's going to cost money. That developer who's done 1 million of these before and knows exactly how to do it, that developer, or really development team, is going to charge an order of magnitude more money to do the gig than a couple kids fresh out of college. If you want quality, you pay for quality. And there's the companies that are outsourcing things to the lowest bidder from the foreign country of choice are focusing on price, not on quality. As long as that's the case, we're never going to get there from here. My colleagues in software engineering and throughout computer science are developing fantastic tools to help automatically detect problems as you're developing. There's all sorts of programming languages where by the time you get past the compiler, all these buffer overflow type issues are just non-problems, because if you program in Java, that just can't be a problem. Well, despite that, how come, let's just tell Microsoft to throw out all their old code and rewrite Windows in Java or C#, right? They'll laugh at you because they've invested millions of man-hours of engineering effort in creating this monolith called Windows. And the time and monetary expense it would take to re-engineer it from scratch properly, it's infeasible. It's incomprehensible. It'll never happen. And that forces us to make do, and that's where we are today.
I think the biggest problem is the cost model is all skewed. The people that would have to pay for the fix are not the people that are feeling the pain of the problem. And so what's happening is all the costs that are distributed to all the people that have to suffer the failures or suffer the stolen information, they're the ones that bear the burden, and a lot of it's hidden cost. And sometimes it's deflected cost. I got an insurance policy that'll cover me, or the bank has to cover the credit cards that got stolen, and so on. So until you kind of fix the model there, it says the guy that actually perpetrated the problem isn't the one that's feeling the cost pain. That cost-benefit trade-off isn't going to work very well.
So this has been a great set of Q&A, and I think I'm going to invite you to continue your questions with our panelists during the reception. There is a lot to do in front of us, and we look forward to solving these problems together.
So thank you one more time.
Yeah.